In the shadow of the world's most well-known Bibles, hidden from the spotlight yet bursting with immense spiritual power, lies the Ethiopian Bible, one of the oldest and most complete biblical texts known to humankind. This sacred book not only preserves ancient wisdom, but also holds truths so profound that they have both comforted the faithful and terrified those in power for centuries. Unlike the widely recognized 66-book King James Bible, the Ethiopian Bible contains 88 books, including texts that were removed or banned from Western Christianity. These sacred writings include the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and the Nagast, each offering spiritual insights and divine mysteries that challenge the traditional narratives of history, power, and faith. For many in the Western world, the Ethiopian Bible remains a mystery, hidden away, rarely discussed, and often dismissed. But why? What is it about this ancient scripture that makes it so feared by religious institutions and colonial empires? Why has it survived the test of time despite efforts to erase its influence? In this deep dive, we will uncover the unique teachings of the Ethiopian Bible that set it apart from other versions, why it was banned and suppressed by political and religious authorities, how it continues to empower believers today, especially in Africa and the diaspora. Brace yourself for an extraordinary journey into one of the world's most powerful yet least understood religious texts. For centuries, the Ethiopian Bible has remained one of the most unique, complete, and ancient biblical texts in existence. Unlike the Western Christian canon, which consists of 66 books, the Ethiopian Bible contains 88 books, preserving scriptures that were removed from the Roman Catholic and Protestant traditions. These include powerful texts such as the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and the Nagast, writings that challenge mainstream Christian narratives and offer a radically different perspective on faith, history, and divine justice. The origins of the Ethiopian Bible date back to the earliest days of Christianity, with many scholars believing it was established in the 4th century AD, around the time of the adoption of Christianity in Ethiopia. Written in Guizi, the ancient liturgical language of Ethiopia, this Bible has remained largely unchanged over centuries, making it one of the closest surviving links to early Christian thought and tradition. While Western Christianity evolved through imperial influence, political councils, and doctrinal shifts, Ethiopian Christianity preserved a more original and unaltered version of the scriptures. One of the most striking differences between the Ethiopian and Western Bibles is their treatment of sacred texts. Many books found in the Ethiopian canon were deliberately removed from Western versions due to their controversial themes and their potential to challenge religious and political power structures. The Book of Enoch, for example, describes fallen angels, divine justice, and apocalyptic visions that were seen as too radical for mainstream Christianity. The Book of Jubilees presents a cosmic calendar that situates human history within a divinely ordained framework, reinforcing the idea that God's justice unfolds according to a sacred, predestined plan. Meanwhile, the Nagast solidifies Ethiopia's divine heritage, tracing its rulers back to King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, asserting that Ethiopia holds a unique and God-ordained role in the history of Christianity. Beyond its theological context, the Ethiopian Bible stands as a symbol of resistance and spiritual independence. While European colonialism spread a version of Christianity that erased many African influences, Ethiopia remained one of the few African nations that was never colonized. Its distinct biblical tradition was untouched by Western imperialism, allowing it to serve as a powerful spiritual and cultural anchor for African identity and Christian faith. Today, the Ethiopian Bible continues to challenge conventional religious narratives and empower those seeking unfiltered truth. Its inclusion of banned scriptures, its deep historical roots, and its commitment to divine justice over human authority make it one of the most powerful and intriguing biblical texts in existence. For those searching for a faith that has remained uncolonized and unaltered, the Ethiopian Bible offers a window into an ancient, uncompromised vision of Christianity. The Ethiopian Bible is not feared merely because of its age and authenticity. It is feared because of what it teaches. Within its pages lies a vision of faith that is radically different from mainstream Christianity, one that champions justice, resistance, and divine accountability. These teachings empower the oppressed and challenge those in power, making them both a source of strength for believers and a threat to corrupt rulers. 3 books in particular stand out for their bold messages and controversial revelations: the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and the Nagast. Each of these texts presents a powerful narrative about divine justice, historical destiny, and Ethiopia's unique role in Christianity. These were not mere religious writings. They were statements of spiritual authority and resistance that shook the foundations of political and religious power. Few biblical texts have been as controversial and feared as the Book of Enoch, once widely accepted by early Christians. This book was later removed from the Western Bible by the Catholic Church. Why? Because it delivers a message that threatens the very structure of power and control. The Book of Enoch tells a story of a righteous man who was so pure in faith that he was taken up into heaven without experiencing death. But its most striking content lies in its account of watchers, fallen angels who defied God's law. These angels descended to earth, took human wives, and gave birth to Nephilim, giant, powerful beings who rule with oppression and violence. God's ultimate judgment upon these fallen angels serves as a warning that no being, human or divine, is above divine justice. This idea was dangerous to religious and political leaders, as it suggested that even the most powerful rulers on earth would one day be held accountable. Western institutions feared this message so much that they erased the Book of Enoch from their canon. Yet in Ethiopia, it remained untouched, unchanged, and unafraid. While the Western Bible presents history as a chaotic sequence of events, the Book of Jubilees reveals a structured, divine timeline, a concept that directly challenges human control over history. This text teaches that history is not random, but follows a divinely orchestrated plan. All struggles, especially those of the oppressed, are part of a greater cosmic purpose. Justice will come, even if it takes centuries to unfold. For colonial rulers, this was a dangerous idea. The Book of Jubilees gave hope to the enslaved and oppressed, assuring them that their suffering was not in vain, and that one day divine justice would overturn earthly oppression. This idea threatened the very foundation of colonial rule, which relied on keeping people disconnected from their spiritual destiny. Among all the books in the Ethiopian Bible, perhaps none is more empowering and politically charged than the Keber Nagast. This book does not just recount religious stories. It establishes Ethiopia as God's chosen nation. The Keber Nagast tells the legendary story of the Queen of Sheba's visit to King Solomon, the birth of Menelik I, Ethiopia's first emperor, who was the son of Solomon and Sheba, and the journey of the Ark of the Covenant, which, according to Ethiopian tradition, now rests in Aksum. This book boldly declares Ethiopia's spiritual authority, tracing its rulers directly to the lineage of King Solomon and affirming that Ethiopia was divinely chosen to preserve the true faith. For European colonialists, this was a direct threat. It countered the idea that African nations were meant to be ruled by foreign empires, instead proclaiming that Ethiopia had a God-given right to sovereignty and spiritual leadership. Taken together, these three books present a faith that is revolutionary, uncompromising, and deeply connected to justice. They tell a story that empowers the oppressed and holds the powerful accountable, a message that Western Christianity worked tirelessly to suppress. Yet, despite centuries of attempt to erase these teachings, the Ethiopian Bible remains a beacon of truth, preserving a vision of Christianity untainted by imperial forces. For those seeking an authentic and unfiltered faith, the Ethiopian Bible offers something truly transformative, a belief system that does not bow to earthly power but instead calls for divine justice, resistance, and ultimate redemption. This is why it is feared, yet it is also why it continues to inspire and empower generations. Throughout history, those in positions of power, whether political rulers or religious leaders, have worked tirelessly to suppress, discredit, and erase the Ethiopian Bible. Unlike the Western 66-book canon, the Ethiopian Bible contains scriptures that empower the oppressed, challenge the authority of rulers, and unveil hidden spiritual truths that disrupt conventional Christian teachings. At its core, the Ethiopian Bible presents a vision of faith rooted in justice and resistance. It proclaims that no empire, no ruler, and no institution is above divine accountability. This message made it a threat to colonial powers, European missionaries, and even Western religious institutions, all of whom sought to maintain control over history, faith, and society. The suppression of the Ethiopian Bible was deeply tied to colonial expansion and the European rebranding of Christianity. During the colonial era, European empires sought to erase African traditions and impose Western religious structures. Christianity, in its European form, was used as a tool to justify domination. teaching submission rather than empowerment. The 66-book Bible promoted by colonial rulers conveniently omitted key scriptures that affirmed Africa's spiritual and royal heritage, as in the Kebra-Nagast, which traces Ethiopian kings to King Solomon, encouraged resistance against foreign rule, teaching that earthly oppression would one day be overturned by divine justice, declare that God's plan favored justice over empire, reminding believers that no human power could stand against God's will. By removing these texts from mainstream Christian teachings, colonial rulers could weaken African spiritual identity and prevent resistance movements. If people believed their suffering was permanent or ordained by God, they were less likely to rebel. But if they held on to the Ethiopian Bible, they would know the truth. God does not side with the oppressors. He delivers justice to the oppressed. Even in the modern era, Western Christian institutions remain largely silent on the Ethiopian Bible. Why? Because acknowledging it would mean confronting uncomfortable truths about how the modern church was shaped by political and colonial interests. The Ethiopian Bible reveals that many biblical books were removed from Western Christianity not for theological reasons, but for political control. Justice and accountability, rather than blind obedience, are at the center of God's plan. Christianity is not a European religion. Its roots are African and Middle Eastern, making the idea of a white Christian identity a false narrative. This contradicts the whitewashed version of Christianity that has been promoted for centuries. It forces believers to rethink history, race, and faith itself, something many religious institutions would rather avoid. Despite centuries of suppression, the Ethiopian Bible has not been lost. It remains a testament to faith unshaken by empire. It continues to inspire those who seek the unfiltered truth, free from political manipulation. For those willing to explore its teachings, it offers a radical reawakening, one that empowers, liberates, and challenges the structures of power that have long sought to silence it. One most powerful yet suppressed truths of Christianity is the African connection to Jesus Christ. For centuries, Western institutions have promoted a whitewashed image of Jesus, portraying him as a fair-skinned, European-looking figure. However, the Ethiopian Bible, one of the oldest and most complete biblical traditions, contradicts this narrative, providing both historical and scriptural evidence that Jesus was a man of African and Middle Eastern descent. The Ethiopian Bible preserves key scriptures that describe Jesus in a way that aligns more with African features than the westernized image imposed by European rulers. Revelation 1 verses 14 to 15 states that Jesus had hair like wool and feet like burnished bronze, a clear depiction of a dark-skinned man with African features. Jesus spent his early years in Egypt, a North African nation, further situating him within an African context. Ethiopia played a central role in early Christianity, as seen in Acts 8 verse 27 to 39, where an Ethiopian official was among the first to accept the faith. These details suggest that Jesus was far more connected to Africa than Western Christianity has acknowledged. As European powers expanded their influence, they deliberately altered religious imagery to serve political and colonial interests. A white Jesus became a symbol of European dominance, used to justify slavery, colonization, and the subjugation of African and indigenous peoples. By erasing Jesus' African and Middle Eastern heritage, European rulers reshaped Christianity into a tool of control rather than liberation. The Ethiopian Bible destroys this false narrative by preserving an uncolonized version of Christianity. It presents a Jesus who stands with the oppressed, not the oppressors, a revolutionary figure whose true identity challenges the Eurocentric version of Christian history. For Black and African believers, embracing the Ethiopian Bible is an act of spiritual empowerment. It reclaims the truth that Christianity did not originate in Europe, and that Jesus was not a symbol of imperial power, but a savior deeply connected to African history and liberation. By restoring the true image of Christ, the Ethiopian Bible offers a powerful counter-narrative, one that can no longer be erased. Despite centuries of suppression, the Ethiopian Bible remains a beacon of faith, resistance, and divine justice. Its survival is not just a testament to Ethiopia's spiritual resilience, but also to the enduring power of a truth that refuses to be erased. For African and diaspora communities, the Ethiopian Bible serves as a spiritual anchor, reaffirming that their history, culture, and faith are deeply intertwined. Unlike the Western biblical tradition shaped by imperial forces and colonial interests, the Ethiopian Bible remains unfiltered, uncolonized, and untouched by foreign influence. It preserves a vision of Christianity that is rooted in Africa, challenging the idea that faith must be defined by European narratives. More than just a religious text, the Ethiopian Bible offers hope in times of struggle. Its teachings remind believers that oppression is temporary, but divine justice is eternal. The Book of Enoch warns that no ruler is beyond judgment, while the Book of Jubilees reassures that history follows God's divine order, ensuring that justice will ultimately prevail. Meanwhile, the Keber Nagast instills national and spiritual pride, affirming that Ethiopia holds a sacred place in God's plan. At its core, the Ethiopian Bible stands as a counter-narrative to oppression. It refuses to let history be rewritten by conquerors, insisting instead that truth, once revealed, cannot be erased. For those seeking a faith that is pure, authentic, and free from imperial manipulation, the Ethiopian Bible remains a light in the darkness, guiding those who dare to reclaim their spiritual identity and divine purpose. The Ethiopian Bible is more than just scripture. It is a revolutionary testament to faith, truth, and resilience. It preserves the ancient teachings of Christianity that Western institutions sought to erase, challenging the Eurocentric narrative that has dominated religious history for centuries. Within its pages, it proclaims divine justice, empowers the oppressed, and dismantles the falsehoods used to justify colonialism and control. This is why it has been feared, suppressed, and ignored by mainstream Christianity. Yet, despite every attempt to erase its influence, the Ethiopian Bible remains unshaken, undefeated, and more relevant than ever. It calls us to reclaim our spiritual heritage, to question what we've been taught, and to embrace a faith that is unfiltered, uncolonized, and deeply rooted in truth. If this message resonated with you, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more powerful insights into history, faith, and hidden truths. Let's continue this journey together, because the truth can no longer be silenced. Stay blessed, stay empowered, and we'll see you in the next video. Have you ever heard of the Ethiopian Bible? Chances are you haven't. This isn't just another version of the Holy Book. It's a collection of scriptures that challenge everything we thought we knew about Christianity, biblical history, and even the way faith has been shaped by political and religious authorities. It is one of the most mysterious, controversial, and powerful texts ever to exist. While most of us are familiar with the 66 books found in the King James Bible, the Ethiopian Bible contains 88 books, including texts that were deliberately excluded from Western Christian traditions. Some of these books, such as the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and various other apocryphal and pseudepigraphal works, contain knowledge that church authorities deemed too dangerous for the general public. But why? What was so threatening about these books that they were erased from mainstream Christianity? To answer that, we must dive deep into history, theological politics, and the hidden truths that have been kept from us for centuries. When most Christians think of the Bible, they picture the familiar 66 books found in the King James Version or other modern translations. However, long before King James commissioned his famous English translation in 1611, another version of the Bible had already existed, one that contained 88 books instead of 66. This ancient text, still in use today, is the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, and preserves scriptures that were removed, banned, or deemed too controversial by Western church leaders. The Ethiopian Bible is one of the oldest and most complete biblical canons in existence. While the Catholic and Protestant Bibles underwent centuries of revisions, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church maintained a broader and more ancient collection of scriptures. Many of the books found in this Bible, such as the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and the Apocalypse of Peter, were once widely read by early Christians but were later excluded from Western traditions. The significance of this Bible extends beyond its contents. It provides insight into a Christian tradition that developed independently from Rome, offering a glimpse into early Christian beliefs before they were reshaped by European influences. Ethiopia's connection to Christianity is far older than most people realize. While many European nations did not adopt Christianity until centuries after Christ, Ethiopia was among the first nations in the world to embrace the faith. By the 4th century AD, the Kingdom of Aksum had already declared Christianity its state religion long before many parts of Europe. Historical records suggest that Ethiopia was a refuge for early Christians fleeing persecution. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church traces its origins to Philip's conversion of the Ethiopian eunuch in the book of Acts, an event that predates the spread of Christianity in much of the Roman Empire. Unlike the Catholic and Protestant traditions, which were heavily influenced by Roman and Greek theological debates, Ethiopian Christianity developed on its own terms, preserving texts and traditions that the Western Church later abandoned. By the time King James I of England ordered a new translation of the Bible in the early 17th century, there were already multiple versions in circulation, each with varying numbers of books. To unify religious practice and strengthen his authority, King James authorized a translation that would settle doctrinal differences. However, this version omitted many books that had been part of earlier biblical collections. The Ethiopian Bible, in contrast, never underwent these revisions. It retained scriptures that were excluded from the Western canon, offering a more expansive and ancient view of Christian history. The books removed from the King James Bible, such as Enoch and Jubilees, contain detailed account of angels, divine judgment, and hidden prophecies, topics that were considered too controversial by European church leaders. The Ethiopian Bible challenges the notion that the King James Version is the ultimate or most complete representation of Christianity. Its existence proves that Christianity was diverse from the beginning, with different regions preserving different collections of sacred texts. It also reveals how political and theological decisions shaped the Bible as we know it today, raising questions about what was lost in the process. As we explore the Ethiopian Bible and the books that were removed, we must ask, why? Why were these texts erased from Western Christianity? What truths did they contain that made them so dangerous to those in power? And most importantly, what does this mean for how we understand the Bible today? The Ethiopian Bible preserves entire books that were erased from Western Christianity, offering a glimpse into a version of faith that was once widely accepted but later suppressed. These lost texts contain prophecies, angelic revelations, and supernatural events that challenge the traditional narrative taught in most churches today. Their removal was no accident. These books held too much power, too much truth, and too many secrets that could have changed the way Christianity developed. Each of these lost books provides valuable insight into the spiritual battles, hidden laws, and cosmic forces at work throughout biblical history. Below are some of the most significant omissions. One of the most famous lost books, the Book of Enoch, was once widely read and even quoted in the New Testament. However, it was later removed because of its radical depictions of angels, the Nephilim, and divine judgment. This book describes the Watchers, fallen angels who descended to earth, taught humans forbidden knowledge, and fathered a race of giants known as the Nephilim. Their corruption led to divine wrath, resulting in the Great Flood. Beyond these supernatural events, the Book of Enoch prophesies the coming of Messiah, the final judgment, and the ultimate fate of both righteous believers and the wicked. The fact that it was removed despite being referenced in the New Testament suggests that early church leaders feared its influence on Christian doctrine. Also known as Little Genesis, the Book of Jubilees provides a detailed retelling of Genesis and Exodus, but with additional insights that are missing from traditional Bibles. This book introduces angelic laws, divine secrets, and the concept of a cosmic war between heavenly forces and demons. It describes how angels pass down laws directly from God, emphasizing the spiritual structure of the universe. It also provides a divinely structured timeline of biblical events, suggesting that human history follows a predetermined plan governed by celestial beings. Such ideas were seen as too mystical by church authorities, leading to the exclusion from Western Christianity. While Western Christianity recognizes the Maccabees and Catholic and Orthodox traditions, the Ethiopian Bible includes a different version known as the Book of Maccabean. This book focuses on martyrs, divine intervention, and spiritual warfare, depicting stories of believers who stood firm in their faith despite persecution. It presents a more spiritually intense version of the Maccabean struggle, emphasizing how God actively fights on behalf of his people. Unlike most books in the modern Bible, the Ascension of Isaiah provides a detailed vision of the heavenly realms, describing how spiritual forces interact with the physical world. This book reveals insights into angels, demons, and the layers of heaven, giving a broader perspective on the unseen dimensions of existence. Additionally, It contains prophecies about the birth and mission of Jesus Christ, offering descriptions that differ from the accounts found in the New Testament. Its exclusion suggests that certain details about Christ's divine role were considered too complex or controversial for mainstream Christian teachings. The Apocalypse of Peter provides a striking vision of heaven and hell, with vivid descriptions of punishments for the wicked. Unlike the mainstream Christian understanding of the afterlife, this book suggests a broader range of divine justice, showing how souls are judged and purified. It was likely removed because it offered an alternative view of salvation and eternal punishment, one that did not fully align with the doctrines later established by the Roman Church. The removal of these books was not simply a matter of theology, it was a deliberate act of control. Many of these texts contain mystical knowledge, apocalyptic warnings, and teachings that empowered individuals rather than institutionalized religion. By eliminating these books, church and political leaders shaped a version of Christianity that aligned with their interests. The Ethiopian Bible, however, remains a testament to the faith's lost diversity, preserving the texts that others sought to erase. As we explore these hidden scriptures, we must ask ourselves, what truths were lost, and how would Christianity look today if these books had never been removed? The Bible as we know it today is a result of centuries of careful selection, translation, and revision, a process driven not only by faith, but also by political and theological agendas. Many assume that the Bible has remained unchanged since its inception, but historical evidence reveals that numerous books were removed, altered, or rewritten to shape Christianity into a more controlled and unified religion. One of the most significant moments in biblical history occurred in 325 AD when Emperor Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea. At this time, Christianity was fragmented, with various sects holding different beliefs and using different texts. The council sought to standardize Christian doctrine, determining which beliefs were correct and which were heretical. Though the Council of Nicaea did not finalize the biblical canon, it laid the foundation for the removal of books that contradicted official doctrine. Many texts that contained mystical knowledge, angelic visions, or alternative accounts of Jesus' life were labeled as dangerous and removed. Over the following centuries, as Christianity became the dominant religion of the Roman Empire, the Church gained unprecedented power. Religious leaders had the authority to determine which scriptures were considered divinely inspired and which were to be rejected. Books that presented conflicting narratives, alternative teachings, or apocalyptic warnings were systematically excluded. The Book of Enoch, for example, was widely read by early Christians and even quoted in the New Testament. Yet because it described fallen angels, the Nephilim, and supernatural revelations, it was later removed from the Western Bible. Similarly, other texts such as Jubilees, the Apocalypse of Peter, and the Ascension of Isaiah were omitted because they contained knowledge that church authorities deemed too controversial. By the time of King James I of England in the early 17th century, Christianity had already splintered into multiple denominations, each using different translations of the Bible. To unify religious practice and reinforce his own authority, King James commissioned a new English translation in 1611. The King James Bible became one of the most influential versions in history, but it was far from a neutral translation. Several books from earlier biblical collections were excluded, and translations were adjusted to reflect theological and political priorities. This version solidified a Eurocentric view of Christianity, reinforcing a carefully curated canon that continues to shape modern Christian beliefs. The removal and rewriting of biblical texts transformed Christianity, shaping it into a more institutionalized faith. The Ethiopian Bible, however, remained untouched, preserving books that were lost to Western believers. This raises an important question. If these scriptures had remained in the Bible, how different would Christianity look today? For centuries, Western Christianity has depicted Jesus as a European figure, shaping religious imagery and doctrine to fit colonial and racial narratives. This portrayal has been so deeply embedded in Christian tradition that many overlook the African influence on Christianity and Jesus' direct connections to the continent. However, historical and biblical evidence tells a different story, one that places Africa at the very heart of the Christian faith. Jesus was born in the Middle East, a region with strong African and Semitic influences, making it unlikely that he resembled the European depiction seen in Western art. The Bible itself highlights Africa's deep connection to his life and ministry. As an infant, Jesus found refuge in Africa when Mary and Joseph fled with him to Egypt to escape King Herod's massacre. Later, during his crucifixion, Simon of Cyrene, an African from modern-day Libya, was chosen to carry Jesus' cross, symbolizing Africa's direct role in his journey to redemption. Africa also played a key role in the early spread of Christianity. An Ethiopian eunuch, a royal official, was among the first recorded Christian converts, baptized by Philip in Acts 8 verse 26 to 39. This event marked Ethiopia as one of the earliest Christian nations, long before much of Europe embraced the faith. Contrary to the myth that Christianity was brought to Africa by European missionaries, Ethiopia and Egypt were Christian strongholds long before Europe fully embraced the faith. By the 4th century AD, Ethiopia had already declared Christianity its state religion, making it one of the first Christian nations in history. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserved traditions that predate many Western Christian doctrines, including sacred texts removed from the King James Bible. The Ethiopian Bible, with its 88 books, contains scriptures such as the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, which were deliberately removed from Western Christianity. If Africa played such a central role in Christianity, why has the European image of Jesus dominated religious teachings? The answer lies in colonialism and racial supremacy. During the European expansion, Christianity was used as a tool to justify slavery and imperial rule. Depicting Jesus as a white figure reinforced the idea of European superiority, making it easier to impose cultural and religious dominance over African and indigenous peoples. By erasing Jesus' African heritage, colonial powers created a version of Christianity that supported their control. Recognizing the African roots of Christianity is not just about historical accuracy. It is about reclaiming a faith that has always been global. Understanding Jesus' true heritage allows Black believers to reconnect with a version of Christianity that was never meant to be Eurocentric or exclusive. Christianity was never a Western religion. It has always been deeply intertwined with Africa. Now it is time to reclaim that truth. The Ethiopian Bible is one of the oldest and most complete biblical canons in existence, containing 88 books, including texts that were deliberately removed from the Western Bible. These missing books reveal prophecies, angelic histories, and divine laws that offer a deeper understanding of Christianity. Yet, rather than being embraced, the Ethiopian Bible was ignored, suppressed, and even discredited. But why? The answer lies in power, politics, and control. The removal of these texts was not simply a theological decision. It was a deliberate effort to shape Christianity into a more structured, politically useful religion. During the early centuries of Christianity, the Roman Empire sought to unify and control the faith. The Council of Nicaea played a crucial role in deciding which books would be included in the biblical canon. Texts that contradicted church doctrine, emphasized mystical knowledge, or empowered individual believers were removed. The Ethiopian Church, however, was never part of this process, allowing it to preserve these banned scriptures. Books like the Book of Enoch, Jubilees, and the Apocalypse of Peter contain teachings about fallen angels, divine judgment, and spiritual warfare. Ideas that challenged the authority of church leaders and presented a more supernatural understanding of the world. These books were considered dangerous because they gave believers direct access to divine mysteries, reducing the need for institutional control. By the time King James I of England commissioned the King James Bible, Western Christianity had already undergone centuries of modifications. The removal of key texts helped solidify a more controlled, European-centered version of Christianity that aligned with the political structures of the time. In contrast, the Ethiopian Bible remained untouched, preserving a form of Christianity that had not been altered by Western religious authorities. This made it a threat to the narrative that Europe was the heart of Christian history. Another reason for suppressing the Ethiopian Bible was its clear connection to Africa's role in early Christianity. Ethiopia was one of the first Christian nations, and its scriptures reflected a deep, independent Christian tradition. If widely accepted, the Ethiopian Bible would challenge the idea that Christianity was a purely Western religion and restore Africa's rightful place in biblical history. The banning of the Ethiopian Bible was not about faith. It was about control. These missing texts provide a richer, more complete understanding of Christianity, one that has been hidden for centuries. As believers rediscover these lost scriptures, they must ask, What else has been kept from us? And how would our faith look today if these books had never been removed? The suppression of the Ethiopian Bible was never about faith alone. It was about power, control, and shaping history to fit a specific narrative. By removing key texts, church and political leaders ensured that Christianity evolved in a way that supported their authority, rather than empowering believers with a full understanding of their spiritual heritage. Now that these lost books are being rediscovered, we must ask ourselves, what have we been missing? The Ethiopian Bible reveals a richer, deeper, and more complete version of Christianity, one that connects back to Africa, ancient traditions, and hidden divine truths. This is a history that was stolen from us, but now we have the chance to reclaim it. If this journey has opened your eyes, don't stop here. There is still so much more to uncover. Subscribe to this channel, stay informed, and help spread the truth. Together, we can break the cycle of erased history and rediscover the real roots of our faith. Thank you for watching, and welcome to the Journey of Truth. The story of Jesus Christ is one that transcends borders, languages, and time. His teachings have shaped civilizations, inspired billions, and continue to offer comfort, hope, and purpose to people across the world. But one significant part of Jesus' identity has often been overlooked, suppressed, or deliberately erased: his African heritage. For centuries, Western cultures have portrayed Jesus as a fair-skinned, blue-eyed figure in religious art and imagery. This depiction, however, is far removed from historical and geographical reality. The idea that Jesus may have had African lineage is not new, but it has been buried beneath layers of cultural and theological suppression. To question the commonly accepted image of a white Jesus is to challenge long-held beliefs, but to ignore the possibility of a black Jesus is to erase a crucial aspect of his identity, one that holds the power to reshape conversations around race, identity, and faith in today's world. In an era where discussions of racial justice and inclusivity are more urgent than ever, rediscovering the African roots of Jesus carries profound significance. What does it mean that this aspect of Jesus' identity has been forgotten? Why was it erased? And why is its restoration so important today? To uncover these answers, we must explore biblical and historical evidence, confront the forces that have obscured this truth, and recognize the pressing need to reclaim it. To understand the African roots of Jesus, we must first acknowledge the geographical and cultural reality of the world in which he lived. Born in Bethlehem in Roman-occupied Judea, Jesus was a Middle Eastern Jew from a land that served as a crossroads between Africa, Asia, and Europe. This region was a melting pot of cultures, ethnicities, and trade routes, creating a rich and diverse social environment that defies the simplistic racial categories imposed by later history. The common Western portrayal of Jesus as a fair-skinned, blue-eyed figure ignores the realities of ancient Judea, where people were of Semitic and Afroasiatic descent, bearing features more aligned with Middle Eastern and North African populations. One of the strongest connections between Jesus and Africa comes from the Gospel of Matthew, which recounts how his family fled to Egypt to escape King Herod's massacre of infant boys. This flight was not a random choice. Egypt, a North African nation, had long been a place of refuge for Jewish people during times of persecution, dating back to the days of Joseph and Moses. Egypt was not simply a safe haven, but a land populated by dark-skinned people of African descent. The fact that Jesus, Mary, and Joseph could live undetected in Egyptian society suggests that their physical appearance was not drastically different from the locals. If they had looked significantly different, such as having European features, they would have stood out in a way that could have endangered them. This small but critical detail points to a Jesus who likely shared physical characteristics with Middle Eastern and North African people rather than the Europeanized version seen in much of Western art. Beyond his time in Egypt, Jesus' African connections extend even further through the cultural and religious landscape of early Christianity. Ancient Christian art and iconography, particularly in Egypt and Ethiopia, depict Jesus with dark skin, woolly hair, and African facial features. The Coptic Christians of Egypt, one of the oldest Christian communities in the world, consistently portrayed Jesus in ways that reflected their own ethnic identity. These depictions were not created for political or racial agendas, but were authentic representations of how these early Christians envisioned their Messiah, one who looked like them. In Ethiopia, a nation with a Christian heritage dating back to the 4th century, the idea of a black Jesus has been preserved for centuries. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, one of the world's oldest Christian traditions, maintains that Jesus had African ancestry and was more closely connected to people of the region than the whitewashed images later imposed by European influence. Ethiopian religious texts, art, and oral traditions uphold the belief that Jesus was not a foreign, European-looking figure, but one who resembled the local population. This belief has shaped the faith and identity of Ethiopian Christians for generations, offering a powerful and affirming vision of Jesus as a savior who shares their heritage. Another strong connection between Jesus and Africa is found in Simon of Cyrene, a man mentioned in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. According to these accounts, as Jesus carried his cross to the site of his crucifixion, he collapsed under its weight. The Roman soldiers, needing someone to assist, forced a bystander named Simon to help carry the cross. Simon was from Cyrene, an important city in modern-day Libya, North Africa. Given that Cyrene was a thriving center of African culture, it is highly likely that Simon was a dark-skinned African man. His presence in this pivotal moment of Jesus' suffering and sacrifice is significant. He was not merely a passerby, but an integral figure in Jesus' journey to the cross, symbolizing the deep ties between Africa and the Christian story. While these historical and biblical connections do not provide definitive proof that Jesus was black in the way modern racial categories define it, they challenge a long-standing portrayal of a white Jesus, a depiction that has dominated Western culture for centuries. From Renaissance paintings to modern media, Jesus has been almost exclusively portrayed with European features, erasing the ethnic diversity of his historical reality. These depictions were shaped by European cultural and political ideologies, reinforcing a Eurocentric version of Christianity that aligned with colonial ambitions and racial superiority. However, across Africa and the African diaspora, the understanding of Jesus as a figure deeply connected to African heritage has never been fully erased. Black Christians across the world, from Ethiopia to the Caribbean to the United States, have embraced the image of a Jesus who shares in their identity, struggles, and experiences. For many, Jesus is not only the Son of God, but also a reflection of their own ancestry, a symbol of hope, resilience, and liberation in the face of centuries of oppression and erasure. The historical and spiritual ties between Africa and Jesus' life are undeniable. From his family's flight to Egypt to the presence of Simon of Cyrene, to the enduring depictions of a black Jesus in early African Christian traditions, the evidence points to a Jesus who was far removed from a fair-skinned, blue-eyed figure that has been widely accepted in the Western world. By reclaiming these African connections, we move closer to a more authentic and inclusive understanding of Jesus, one that honors the diversity of the ancient world and challenges the racialized images that have shaped Christianity for centuries. Revisiting the African roots of Jesus is not about altering history to fit a modern racial agenda. Rather, it is about restoring a truth that has been buried beneath centuries of whitewashing and distortion. Recognizing Jesus' connection to Africa allows us to see him in a new, yet historically accurate light, as a figure who belongs to all of humanity, transcending race and ethnicity, while also affirming the deep and meaningful ways in which he is particularly relevant to Black and African-descended Christians. The erasure of Jesus' African identity was not accidental. It was intentional, shaped by centuries of political, cultural, and theological manipulation. As Christianity spread beyond the Middle East and into Europe, it became increasingly entangled with imperial power, leading to the transformation of Jesus' image to align with the dominant racial and political structures of time. The whitewashing of Jesus was not just an artistic choice, but a calculated effort to reshape Christianity to serve the interests of European rulers and colonial expansion. Understanding how and why this erasure happened is essential to recognizing its lasting impact and the importance of reclaiming a more accurate and inclusive vision of Jesus today. The process of erasing Jesus' African and Middle Eastern heritage began as Christianity transitioned from a persecuted faith to an institutionalized religion within the Roman Empire. In the 4th century, Emperor Constantine made Christianity the empire's official religion, transforming it from a movement of the marginalized into a tool of state power. As Rome sought to unify its vast and diverse territories under one faith, the portrayal of Jesus evolved to reflect the Greco-Roman ideals of beauty, power, and divinity. European artists, influenced by classical sculpture and philosophy, began depicting Jesus with fair skin, straight hair, and European facial features, replacing more Semitic and African representations that had existed in the early Christian world. The Council of Nicaea was a turning point in this transformation. Although primarily focused on theological disputes, this council helped establish the framework for a European-centered Christianity, further distancing Jesus from his Middle Eastern and African roots. Over time, Western Christianity became increasingly identified with European identity, and the image of a white Jesus became a symbol of divine authority, reinforcing the growing connection between religious power and European dominance. During the Middle Ages and Renaissance, the portrayal of Jesus as white became even more entrenched, largely due to the influence of European artists such as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. These artists, working under the patronage of powerful rulers in the Catholic Church, created iconic images of Jesus that conformed to European beauty standards. These depictions were not based on historical accuracy, but on cultural preference and political necessity. A white Jesus symbolized purity, divinity, and moral superiority in a European context. These images spread across the Christian world, shaping the way billions of people visualize their faith and reinforcing the association of whiteness with godliness. The erasure of Jesus' African connections took on even greater significance during the age of European colonialism. As European powers expanded their empires across Africa, Asia, and the Americas, they used Christianity as a justification for conquest, subjugation, and enslavement of non-European peoples. A white Jesus became a powerful ideological tool, reinforcing the notion that Christianity, and by extension, civilization and morality, was inherently European. During the transatlantic slave trade, enslaved Africans were forcibly converted to Christianity, but they were presented with a version of faith that upheld their oppression rather than their liberation. They were taught to worship a white Jesus who resembled their enslavers, reinforcing the idea that divinity and power were tied to whiteness, while blackness was associated with servitude and inferiority. Slave owners used misinterpreted biblical passages to justify slavery, claiming that black people were cursed and destined to be subjugated. The erasure of Jesus' true ethnic and racial identity played a crucial role in constructing these racist ideologies, ensuring that Christianity could be wielded as a tool of control rather than emancipation. Even after slavery was abolished, the whitewashed image of Jesus continued to shape racial hierarchies in Christian societies. The idea of a European-looking Christ became deeply embedded in Western religious thought, reinforcing white supremacy and marginalizing non-white Christian communities. In America, during the era of segregation and Jim Crow laws, black Christians often found themselves worshiping in churches adorned with images of a white Jesus who had been used to justify their oppression. The contradiction between the liberating message of Jesus and the racist structures upheld by his distorted image led many African Americans to reclaim and reinterpret their faith, searching for a Jesus who truly stood with the oppressed. The Protestant Reformation, which sought to reform the Catholic Church's practices, did little to challenge this racialized image of Jesus. While the Reformation brought significant theological shifts, it did not question the white European portrayal of Christ, further entrenching his distorted image in Christian tradition. This Europeanized version of Jesus was exported globally through missionary work, ensuring that colonized peoples around the world were taught to worship a Christ who looked nothing like them. The consequences of this erasure have been profound. By depicting Jesus as white, Western Christianity reinforced the idea that whiteness was closer to divinity, while non-white people were positioned as spiritually and morally inferior. This belief system contributed to the justification of colonialism, apartheid, and racial discrimination, distorting the very essence of Jesus' teachings on love, justice, and equality. The white Jesus became a tool of oppression, used to maintain social control and reinforce racial hierarchies. However, despite centuries of suppression, the truth about Jesus' African connections has not been entirely lost. Theologians, historians, and scholars across the world have increasingly challenged the whitewash narrative, calling for a return to a more accurate representation of Jesus as a Middle Eastern, Afroasiatic man. They argue that recognizing Jesus' true ethnic and racial identity is not just about historical accuracy, but also about spiritual justice, correcting the distortions that have been used to uphold racial oppression in the name of Christianity. For many black and African-descended Christians, reclaiming the image of black Jesus is an act of empowerment. It is a way to connect their faith to their identity, history, and struggles, reminding them that Christianity is not a foreign religion imposed by colonizers, but a faith deeply rooted in their own heritage. Across Africa, the Caribbean, and the United States, black churches and theologians have long maintained that Jesus' story is one of liberation, resistance, and solidarity with the oppressed. Revisiting the erasure of black Jesus forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the ways religion has been used to justify injustice. It challenges us to rethink how we visualize, interpret, and teach the story of Jesus, ensuring that faith is no longer used as a tool of division, but as a force for healing and reconciliation. Recognizing the true ethnic diversity of Jesus does not diminish his divinity or universality. It enriches our understanding of his humanity and the radical inclusivity of his message. Ultimately, the deliberate whitewashing of Jesus was a strategic effort to align Christianity with European power structures, shaping the way race and identity were understood within religious and social systems. This process distorted theology, justified oppression, and marginalized non-white people within the faith. By reclaiming the African and Middle Eastern identity of Jesus, we dismantle the harmful association between whiteness and divinity, restoring a vision of Christianity that embraces all people, regardless of race or background. In challenging these long-standing distortions, we move toward a more just and inclusive understanding of Jesus, one that truly reflects his mission to stand with the poor, the marginalized, and the oppressed. Recognizing that Jesus was not European, but a man deeply connected to Africa, allows us to see him not as a tool of empire, but as a symbol of justice, liberation, and hope for all people. In a world still grappling with the deep and lasting effects of racism, colonialism, and systemic oppression, the story of black Jesus carries immense significance. The image of a white, European-looking Christ has long been used to reinforce racial hierarchies, marginalize non-white communities, and justify injustice. But reclaiming the true historical and cultural identity of Jesus, a man born in the Middle East, deeply connected to Africa, and likely sharing the features of Afroasiatic peoples, offers a powerful counter-narrative. The struggle for racial justice, identity, and equality is not only a political fight, but a spiritual one, and at the heart of this battle lies the question: who is Jesus, and what does he represent in the fight for justice today? For centuries, the whitewashed image of Jesus has been used to maintain systems of oppression. During the transatlantic slave trade, enslaved Africans were forcibly converted to Christianity, but they were given a version of the faith that served the interests of their oppressors. They were taught to worship a Christ who resembled their masters, a fair-skinned, blue-eyed figure whose depictions subtly reinforced the idea that whiteness was divine and that blackness was inferior. Slave owners used misinterpreted Bible passages to justify their cruelty, while black believers were told to accept their suffering as part of God's will. In this context, Christianity became not a source of liberation but a tool of control, distorting Jesus' true teachings of justice and freedom. Yet, despite these efforts to suppress the truth, enslaved Africans and their descendants found ways to reclaim Jesus as a figure of resistance. In secret gatherings, in coded spirituals, and the formation of the black church, they reinterpreted the gospel, seeing in Jesus not a passive figure of submission but a liberator, one who had come to set the captives free, to stand with the oppressed, and to bring justice to the world. The story of Jesus, persecuted by the authorities, executed by the state, and resurrected as a symbol of triumph, resonated deeply with their own struggles. They saw themselves in his suffering and, more importantly, in his resurrection. This was the birth of a radical, liberating faith, one that rejected the distortions imposed by white supremacy and instead embraced the true revolutionary message of the gospel. During the civil rights movement, black religious leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, despite their differing religious beliefs, both recognized the importance of challenging the white image of Jesus in shaping black consciousness. Dr. King, in his speeches and sermons, often invoked Jesus as a revolutionary standing against oppression and calling his followers to fight for justice. He argued that the true Jesus of history would not stand with segregationists or racists, but with the poor, the marginalized, and the victims of racial violence. This understanding of Jesus, not as a symbol of white power but as a champion of the oppressed, became a powerful foundation for the black freedom struggle. Today, this fight continues. In movements like Black Lives Matter, activists have drawn on the image of Black Jesus as a powerful symbol of resistance to systemic racism, police violence, and economic inequality. The parallels between Jesus' life and the experiences of Black people today are striking. Jesus was born under Roman occupation, grew up in poverty, was targeted by the state, falsely accused, brutally beaten, and publicly executed. His story is not far removed from the modern realities of racial profiling, mass incarceration, and state violence faced by Black communities worldwide. For many, Jesus' crucifixion mirrors the lynchings of Black men and women throughout history, while his resurrection serves as a radical testament to the enduring power of hope, justice, and divine vindication. Reclaiming Black Jesus is not just about historical accuracy. It is about challenging the systems that have used religion as a tool of oppression. It forces us to ask difficult questions. Who benefits from the image of a white Jesus? What does it mean when the dominant depiction of Christ reflects the image of those who have historically oppressed others? How has this distortion shaped racial inequality within the church and society at large? These questions are uncomfortable but necessary. The fight for racial justice is not just about policy changes or economic reform. It is also about dismantling the deep-seated psychological and spiritual hierarchies that have kept whiteness at the center of power. Many Black churches and theologians are leading the way in this reclamation movement, embracing a Christ who is not European, but a Middle Eastern, Afroasiatic man, a Jesus who looks like the people he came to serve. The shift is not just symbolic. It has real implications for how faith communities engage with social justice. A Black Jesus calls Christians to actively oppose racial injustice, economic inequality, and all forms of oppression, rather than passively accepting them. This understanding of Jesus demands action, calling believers to stand in solidarity with the poor, to speak out against police brutality, to fight for fair wages, and to work toward dismantling racist structures. Beyond religious spaces, Black Jesus has become a powerful cultural and political symbol. In art, music, and literature, he is invoked as a figure of defiance, empowerment, and justice. Artists like Basquiat, filmmakers like Spike Lee, and musicians from gospel to hip-hop have challenged traditional portrayals of Jesus, offering a counterimage that reflects the realities of Black struggle and resilience. In protests, signs bearing the image of a Black Jesus remind the world that the fight for justice is not just a secular battle, but a deeply spiritual one. This shift in how Jesus is seen and understood also extends beyond the Black community. More churches and scholars around the world are acknowledging that the portrayal of Jesus matters. Representation shapes how people see themselves, how they see others, and how they understand their place in the divine story. When Black and brown believers see a Jesus who looks like them, it reinforces their dignity, worth, and divine calling. Conversely, when people of all races recognize Jesus as a man of color, it challenges the association of whiteness with godliness, dismantling the racist ideologies that have shaped Christianity for centuries. Reclaiming Black Jesus is an act of spiritual and historical justice. It restores the true diversity of Christianity, reminding the world that Jesus' message is not the property of any one race or culture. It is a universal call to love, equality, and radical justice. As society continues to confront systemic racism and the lingering effects of colonialism, the image of a Black Jesus serves as a powerful force of liberation, calling all people to recognize that faith should never be used to oppress but to uplift. Ultimately, Black Jesus is more than an icon. He is a call to action. He challenges us to live out the values of justice, compassion, and resistance against all forms of oppression. He reminds us that the struggle for racial justice is not only a fight for legal and political rights, but a sacred mission, one deeply rooted in the life, teachings, and sacrifice of Christ himself. To embrace Black Jesus is to embrace a faith that is unapologetically on the side of the oppressed, a faith that seeks not just personal salvation, but the transformation of the world itself. Restoring the true image of Jesus is about more than history. It's about reclaiming a faith that is inclusive, just, and liberating. Jesus did not come for the privileged. He stood with the poor, the oppressed, and the marginalized. Recognizing his African and Middle Eastern identity challenges long-standing distortions and brings us closer to the truth of who he was and what he stood for. By confronting the whitewashing of Jesus, we break free from narratives that have been used to justify oppression and inequality. Instead, We reclaim a Christ who embodies justice, love, and unity for all people. This is a powerful step toward healing, understanding, and building a faith that reflects the diversity of humanity. If this message resonated with you, we invite you to join the conversation. Subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking discussions on faith, history, and justice. Don't forget to leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and may we all continue seeking truth, challenging misconceptions, and embracing a faith that unites rather than divides.